Hey everybody, it's Matt here from pianoblog.com. I thought I'd make a short video on how to videotape yourself when you're practicing, how to use videotaping in practicing or maybe audio taping in practicing, because this is a question I get asked a lot and it's certainly something that I'm always asking my students to do. So I want to talk about when you should use video or audio taping as a part of your practice routine, and then also what are a couple of the benefits of that. Generally speaking, I tend to use videotaping when I'm well enough along with a piece. Not necessarily that it has to be perfect, but that I'm well enough along with the piece that I've kind of learned the notes and I'm at the stage of it, at least starting to polish it or starting to polish a section of it. I don't usually use any sort of recording as a form of practice when I'm just starting the piece, because in that first stage of starting or learning a piece, like I've talked about in other videos, typically you're wanting to go slow enough with a very, very low pressure so that you can sort of build that roadmap or those tracks for playing the piece. And if you put a lot of pressure on yourself, like by video or audio taping yourself, you might find that that inhibits kind of a relaxed learning style at that stage. However, once you get far enough along, at least with a section of the piece, even with a couple lines, where you're starting to want to polish a little bit, it can really, really help to videotape your playing. And nowadays this is very easy. I remember when I was in college or earlier, I used to go out of my way to buy these expensive recording devices and stuff like that. But now we all have smartphones, so all you have to do is flip your phone around, put it on, and you can videotape yourself. Now the sound might get a little bit distorted, so you want to take it with a grain of salt. For example, my phone, when I record myself, the pitches in the higher range tend to get amplified a lot more than pitches in the lower range. I don't know if it's that way for every device, but you want to take things with a grain of salt there. But what this does for you is it has actually a couple benefits, and I'm really all about it. I found that some people are really resistant to videotaping themselves, and it's really too bad because if you're not doing that, if you're not using this as sort of a form of self-awareness or a feedback technique, you're missing out on a lot in your piano practice. So anyway, once I'm far enough along, or I have a section of a piece at least that I've started to polish, I'll go ahead and videotape myself, and there are two things that I think I really get out of this. The first thing is, and probably the thing of maybe secondary importance, is just technically I might notice that, say, I have a little bit of tension in my shoulders, or I'm doing something weird technically. If you're specifically working on technique, you can use video for this. For example, if you're working on something from my technique course, a lot of people have found that when they videotape their playing, they can actually see how they're moving and what motor patterns they're using. And I suggest this because it's very, very common that the motor patterns that you're using or the way that you're sitting, you might actually not realize you're doing that. It's very common for people to have kind of a mismapped image of what their body is doing, and then when they actually see it, it's kind of like, oh wow, I didn't know I had that kind of tension in my shoulders. I didn't know I was slouching. I didn't know that my hands were all collapsed, or whatever the case may be. So that can be really, really helpful. Of course, there's a context and a time and a place for it. You don't want to make yourself so uptight about every little thing that you're doing that you can't even function. But just as a general tool, it's very helpful. But for me at least, probably the primary importance of video and audio taping myself is that it gives me feedback on how I sound. And this can be a really amazing thing, especially when you've practiced a piece for a long time. You're going to find that what you think it sounds like is often, or what the sound that you think you're producing is often quite different than the sound that's actually being produced. And it's kind of similar to when you hear yourself talking for the first time. You kind of go, oh wow, I didn't know I sounded like that. Well, it's the same thing on the piano. We have, especially with the piano, a lot of a mechanism between ourselves and the sound that's being produced in a different way than, say, a vocalist or, say, a string player or wind player would. You know, if you're playing a wind instrument, you're actually producing that airflow, and so there's a little more of a physical connection. But at the piano, we have this mechanism between ourselves and the sound that's coming out of the piano. And it's very easy for things to get percussive or for us to have an imagined sound in our head that's different than what's coming out. And that's why when I'm teaching, or if you're a teacher, you found this, that you'll ask a student like, oh, did you hear that that wasn't legato or that that was accented or whatever? And it's not that they weren't trying to pay attention, it's that they were confusing the imagined sound in their head with what they were actually producing. And so videotaping yourself can basically let you sit back and listen to what you did and kind of critique yourself in the same way that a teacher would. And I find this an extraordinarily helpful practice technique because I can play a passage, a page, or a piece, then I can listen to myself, take some notes, go back and play again. And a lot of performers do this as a way of really polishing their playing. I guess a third thing that's really important that I've mentioned before in other videos is when you audio or videotape yourself, especially I think videotaping yourself, it does a little bit of simulating a performance type of feel. It gets you used to being in a performance type of mindset where you're really listening to yourself and trying to gauge what you're doing while you're playing, trying to put yourself in that sort of performing mindset in a way that practicing doesn't. And I think actually that this is one reason people don't like videotaping themselves when they're playing, because it lends a little bit of honesty to everything that's going on. It makes us be honest about what we actually sound like versus what we think we'd sound like or what we'd like to sound like. And I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. It's much more fun to play something and just kind of think like, oh man, I sound really awesome, than to videotape yourself and think, oh man, that, you know, I have some things I need to work on. So you don't want to get too down on yourself if you do this. There is something I've seen where people are so involved with a piece that they start to get picky and they can't move at all or do anything. But usually people are more on the other side of the spectrum. Most people could use a little bit of kind of objective watching and listening to what they're doing. So those are some notes on videoing your practice. I hope you find this helpful. Again, don't start it too soon because you'll kind of freak yourself out. But when it's the time, I would definitely recommend making a habit of doing quite a bit of this kind of watching and listening to yourself play and incorporating that into your practice. All right, so that's it for now. Love to hear your questions and comments. Definitely subscribe to my YouTube if you haven't, because I'm trying to put these videos and questions and answers out frequently. And also, if you're interested, go ahead and visit pianoblog.com, where I have more information and some free courses and stuff like that. And feel free to email me your questions because I love to answer them here, and I'll see you in the next video.